it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Would Dan King ever find the hidden lair of the Beastmaster, who nightly sent his hairy hordes to maim and kill? How could he possibly locate that den of ghastly horrors in time to save his beloved from becoming the fiend's willing plaything, a creature half ape, half woman? Satan's Scalpel by Arthur Leo Zagat. Chapter 1. Ape Attack. Into the sideshow tent the strident blare of an organ filtered. A barker's raucous shouts, the crack of rifles from a shooting gallery, or the surging, happy commotion of Cramport's annual gala night. It was spring. Solburn's super shows were once more starting out on the road, and the factory town was getting a preview of its refurbished marvels. The simple people of the community were also getting, all unknowingly, a preview of the horror that was to come before the gaudy caravan returned to its winter quarters. Horror that would paint faces now glowing under the flare of carnival torches with the grey of grisly dead. That would make screams of terror tear through throats now chortling with laughter and replace happiness with the desolation of fear-bred madness. Hot, hot, get 'em while they're red hot, a Wiener vendor cried, and from the thriller ride shrilled the jovial shrieks of its tumbled patrons. But within the canvas walls of Zortal's tent, the clamour was muted by a strained, taut hush. The terraced bleachers were in shadow, so that from Dan King's front row seat, the packed benches were only a mounting blank of pallid blurred ovals. But he knew that their occupants were hunched forward, silently, almost grimly intent on the huge ape in the central arena, staring at the ape and the stocky, swart-visaged human in close-fitting tights of green silk who stood to one side, glowering and quite motionless. Gasoline flares, high on poles, stabbed down at the hard-packed earth, filled the ring with a dancing, fitful glare. The long black lash of a cruel whip hung down along Zortal's leg and coiled at his feet, but neither by word nor sign was he giving any direction to the shaggy, lumbering primate in its incredible routine. Nada Stone's little hand crept into King's protective one. It was icy, quivering. "Oh, I don't like it," she whispered tremulously. "There's something wrong about it. Something dreadfully wrong." A shudder ran through her slender body, so tinglingly close against his own. "The brood is better trained than most, that's all," the young automotive engineer rumbled. But even as he said it, chill prickles ran up and down his spine, and he was conscious of a faint quiver at the pit of his stomach. Was it some primeval fear that crawled sluggishly in his blood, some ancestral memory of the days when man first moved into caves, and the tree people still stalked him through many steamy jungles? But, then again, he'd seen great apes before and felt nothing but a mild interest. In the hulking chimpanzee padding noiselessly out there was some eerie, too human quality. Vaguely he too sensed that it had passed through some strange metamorphosis into a being neither beast nor man, into an entity beyond the pale of familiar things. The gigantic beast, bent-kneed, long-armed, blackly hirsute, shuffled to a large mound in the center of the ring and jerked a tarpaulin from it. A stripped automobile chassis stood, revealed, with bare framework, and beside it a helter-skelter pile of gears, steel rods, castings, all the multifarious parts of a car's power plant. Ranged on a canvas strip were wrenches, spanners, and other implements. The polished tools splintered light into darting gleams. Muscles tightened along the ridge of Dan King's square jaw. A murmur ran through the crowd, almost a moan. Nearly all of them workers in Cramport's 2 automobile factories. Every man in the gasping audience had often just seen such piles of jumbled parts. King, himself part owner and engineer of the Mayflower plant, had arranged more than one such display for speed tests between crews of expert assemblers. Good Lord, was this ape... The astounding speculation became reality. The primate snatched up tools, fell on the tumbled mass of fabricated metal, and with incredible swiftness it changed. With unbelievable speed, a motor grew on the chassis, a crankshaft clanged into place, connecting rods were fitted to their bearings. Muscles swelled under the shaggy hide. The tremendous chest heaved as weights ordinarily handled by clanking cranes yielded to the chimpanzee's gigantic strength and were lifted and dropped meticulously into their beds. Grotesque black paws darted in intricate manipulations with a deftness, a dexterity that no human laborer could surpass. "Oh, no, no," Nada whimpered. "It isn't doing it. It can't be. It just isn't possible." She was warm, palpitant within the curve of Dan King's arm, but in that moment he did not wonder at his daring, at her acquiescence. His throat was dry, his brain throbbed with an astonishment that was almost pain. He pulled his gaze from the fantastic performance, sought saner things for assurance of his own sanity. Across the ring, nearly opposite, Ned Salburn leaned forward, his heavy-jowled face flushed, his jaws working on his eternal tobacco cud. Further along was Warren Fenton, superintendent for United Motors of their Hiawatha factory, Mayflower's bitterest rival. Fenton's fox-like expression was livid, his eyes almost popping from his head. The emerald-clad man in the arena was somehow more upright. There was a swagger in the tilt of his, Zortal's, shoulders, in the poise of his head, as though he was saying, with gloating triumph, "I have done this, I, Zortal the Great." From somewhere high up, a hoarse voice boomed. "Hey, come out from under that mask, Pat Cooney. We know you. Come out." Well, tension broke as boisterous, almost hysteric laughter swept the big tent. The great ape dropped its wrench, twisted around to face the jester, and King's scalp tightened as he saw in the beast's russet fur a bald spot crowning its browless skull that had a gargoyle-esque resemblance to the popular foreman who had quit the factory without notice about a month before. Then the similitude was gone. The ape was altogether bestial as it loped forward, its curved knuckles brushing the ground. Light struck across its snouted, leathery expression and the bridgeless spread of its flat nose, while the grotesque visage worked with some obscure emotion. "Hey, get back there!" Zortal shouted, coming alive. "Get back!" He was moving to intercept the chimpanzee's path, his long, wicked lash lifting in his sinewy hand. Well, the ape came on, ignoring its master, thick lips snarling away from yellow fangs as it came straight for King, and he half lifted from his seat with some dim notion of fending the brute off from Nada. Suddenly it was very near, and Dan could see its look. His skin was suddenly a tight covering for his quivering body. His palms were wet with cold sweat. Good God, those were not the eyes of an animal. A soul looked out from those eyes, a tortured human soul, and in their blue depths fear crawled in a suffering, terrible way. Something flashed across King's vision, and there was the crack of a gunshot. No, it was Zortal's whip as it lashed across the ape's hairy back, lifted, writhed, and bit savagely again and again into brute flesh. "Back to your work! Back, I say!" Clamour beat about Dan. Shouts, a woman's scream, was suddenly swallowed, blotted out by an abysmal, thunderous roar that filled the tent with the sound, almost tangible, that blasted its listeners with devastating terror. The ape whirled on its tormentor. The outlash of its colossal arm was the lightning strike of a rattlesnake, and Zortal's whip was in the grip of a black, gnarled paw now, and was wrenched from the trainer's grip as the beast crouched and then pounced. Zortal went down under a grunting, snarling tornado of hairy fury, and the flash of green silk was gone. Dan King was somehow now in the ring. He was tugging frantically at a pole at the top of which a torch flared. A shriek burbled in his ears, a shriek of purest agony. The rod came away in King's hands, and he whirled, threw himself at the monstrous, snarling simian. His extempore weapon pounded down, and flame splashed on tossing, red-brown unkemptness. Burned hair, frying flesh stung its nostrils, and the chimpanzee surged upright, twisting. King leapt far back, and the enraged beast loomed over him, tremendous. Its brutish mouth yawned cavernous, and its bellow was about him like a black flood. Fetid breath gusted over him. For an off instant, fear ran icy in the engineer's veins. Monstrous arms flailed, and the giant ape sprang, still roaring, to tear him apart. King's muscles exploded into swift movement, and he lunged forward to meet the cataclysmic rush, and thrust the blazing flare squarely into the brute's face. The creature screamed, and the man leapt back out of its reach, lithely. The flame pot rolled across the ground, vomiting flame and black smoke. The chimpanzee thudded to a halt. It clawed at its cooked face with huge hands, and he saw that in the deep-sunk sockets under the overhang of its forehead there were blackened cinders where eyes should be. Nada was suddenly beside King, clutching his arm. "Dan!" the girl shrilled. "Dan, come back! He'll kill you!" The ape whirled to the sound, lurched blindly toward it, great paws sweeping out to clutch Nada. In a single flash of action, Dan hurled the girl aside, lanced the stake at the cyclonic onrush of the maddened brute, and jabbed its pointed ferrule into the ape's gaping mouth. The impact threw King backward, sprawling upon the ground, but the beast's own terrific momentum impaled it, drove the pole out through the back of its neck. Blood rush choked off the nerve-shattering roar, and the gigantic animal pounded down, a threshing, gory horror. King rolled over and scrambled to his feet, frantically seeking Nada. He fought the nausea that retched bitterness into his mouth. Figures were all about him, blocking his vision. Someone grabbed his hand and pulled him around. A crowd ringed him in, white-faced and spewing oaths. It split apart, and Zortal came through, his green suit ripped, one arm dangling limply, shoulder askew. King stared at him, stupid with amazement. The man's face was contorted with rage, his eyes black with fury. "Damn you!" he squealed, rage thinning his voice. "You've killed him! Murderer!" The fellow's good hand came up, forming a fist. Dan's muscles knotted, but pudgy fingers, those of Ned Salbin's, grabbed Zortal's wrist. "Stop it, you fool!" the showman roared. "Stop it! He saved your life. You'd be in little pieces now if it wasn't for him, and the rest of us were paralyzed." The trainer's thin mouth twitched. His stocky frame quivered as he visibly fought to gain control. But, he husked, "he's ruined the work of many years. The greatest attraction." "Ah, the devil with that," Solwyn replied. "You'll get another chimp. Train it. I'll keep you on the payroll, and then next year." "Oh, to hell with next year." Wrath seemed to have drained out of the man, but his expression was still livid, tiny fires smouldering in his eyes. "I'll have another one for you in 2 weeks. A better one. I know how now." Disbelief showed in the carnival proprietor's expression. "All right then, 2 weeks. But come away. Come out of here. Let's go get your arm fixed." Dan, darling, are you hurt? Are you all right?" King wheeled around to see Nada. Her white frock was dirt-smeared, and there was a brown splotch across her cheek. But something in her eyes sent a thrill through him, surging warmly in his veins. "Nada." He reached for her. "Nada, let's get out of this." Words were on his tongue that for months he'd choked down, had hardly dared to think. "Let's get out." The crowd parted for them. They went past Zortal, and the man lipped, "I won't forget you, Mr. King. I won't forget this." It might have been thanks, but somehow the man's green costume seemed to make him oddly reptilian, poisonous. His black cold eyes flickered from Dan to the girl his arm encircled, and little lights crawled in them, little lascivious lights. There was a crowd outside too, and more coming on the run, brought by swift rumor. "Hey, what happened, Mr. King?" someone called, reaching out to stop them. Dan scarcely heard, and didn't answer. They were in his Mayflower 8 and were roaring away, out of the fairgrounds, out along the car tracks of the shore road to where the big house stood, set far back from the road. As a shoeless kid, he'd long ago brought the laundry to the back door of that house. The small girl in crisp organdy whom he would see on the lawn, black ringlets curling about her tiny, piquant face, fat little legs twinkling, had made him poignantly conscious of his tattered clothes, of the tumble-down shack in Frog Hollow that was his home. Once she'd smiled at him, and he'd run away. He thought he'd forgotten her in the long years between, years filled with days of grueling labor, with nights of more grueling study. His inventions, his genius for the management of labor, had multiplied the production, the profits of the Mayflower plant. Even when Roger Stone had recognized his ability, had given him greater and greater responsibility, and last year taken him into partnership, Dan King had still remained the kid from Frog Hollow, and the big house a palace, with the girl who lived there unapproachable as royalty itself. Well, she had come into the office more and more frequently. He'd been wordless in her presence, awkward, had found duties to take him out into the plant. But increasingly, she'd haunted his dreams, and when her father had asked him today to take her to the carnival, he had trembled inwardly. He slowed the car at the big stone gate and turned to her. "Nada," he murmured. "Nada, I love you. I've always loved you." Chapter 2. The Headless Corpse. The rush of night air about him could not quench the tingle of Nada's parting kiss on Dan King's lips. A vast excitement possessed him, joy pulsed in his big body. He wanted to shout, to trumpet it triumphantly to sleeping Cramport. "Nada's mine, all mine. She loves me, do you hear that? And she is going to be my wife." Trees gave way to flatlands, and the dark loom of the Mayflower plant's low buildings was unreeling in his sight. Yellow oblongs showed windows still lighted in the administration building. Roger Stone was still there then. King's sedan nosed into the cinder driveway and skidded to a stop. The broad-shouldered man with hair that was as black as Nada's, save for graying temples, looked up from a desk spread with blueprints and sheets of typed manuscript. Dan halted inside the office door that, for the first time, he'd flung open without the formality of knocking, and tried to find word to tell Nada's father of what had happened. There was a smile of approval on the older man's aristocratic expression. "Dan, my boy," Stone said, "you've done it again. The new car will cut the feet out from under the Hiawatha Company. We'll be able to undersell them by $200 and deliver a better job for the money. I've already had Johnson send off the patent applications to Washington. We'll be able to start production in a month. Congratulations." "Thanks." King brushed aside the phrases that only this afternoon would have meant so much to him. "Well, glad you like it, but, I got something to tell you about Nada." The other man came up out of his chair. "Nada? Something happened?" "Oh, no, sir. That is nothing bad." Dan was now stammering like a schoolboy. She is promised to be my wife." Stone was a graven image, standing behind his desk. The office was deathly still. Papers crackled under his blue-veined hands as he pressed down on them. "She's promised to be your wife?" The words dribbled from his lips that were white under his grey moustache, and there was something in the way he said them, something in his eyes, that brought a hot flush to King's cheeks. "Well, I picked you out of the stink and filth of Frog Hollow to make a man of you, and this is how you thank me? You..." Contempt was a knife edge in his tone. "The son of a drunkard who died in the gutter, of a washwoman who scrubbed my drawers. are going to give me grandchildren? Oh no. Slow anger mounted in Dan. His great hands knotted, nails digging into their palms. But he managed to hold himself in place. You did not make a man of me, Mr. Stone. Whatever I am, whatever I possess, I have earned. Fenton would have had you down long ago if it weren't for me. If you wish, you can have it all back. My job, my partnership in the firm. United Motors has been after me for years. I can go to them tomorrow, and they'll be glad to have me. You can have the new car whose plans lie on your table. I'll give them a better one. And Nada will go with me. You can't stop her. She loves me, and you can't hold her. Silence again clotted in the room. The two men faced each other, their stares clashing, indomitable, their wills wrestling in a wordless combat. And then, quite suddenly, Dan realized that Stone was an old, broken man whose hand abruptly gestured in a curious, almost pathetic movement. Nope, I can't hold her. I've never been able to do anything with her, not since her mother died so long ago. And I need you. I need you, Dan. Just give me a chance. Let me take her away on a trip somewhere. Look, she's so young, she may not know her own mind. And I'm tired, sick. I need a rest. If she still wants you 3 months from now, you can have her. And we'll go on as before. King sucked breath in between cold lips. She was necessary to him now, a part of him. Not to see her for 3 long months. Oh, you're not afraid, are you? If she loves you, as she says, 3 months' absence will make no difference. And if it should, well, you have no right to her. No right. Well, it was a challenge he could not evade. All right. He didn't want to say it, but he had to. God help him, he had to. All right, go ahead. Its motor purring sweet rhythm that should have been music to Dan King's ears. The Mayflower 8 poured itself down Railroad Street. The engine should have been music, and the far-off hoot of a locomotive whistle wailing down the night wind should have set pulses leaping in his wrists. For Nada Stone was on that train, bringing her back to Cranport and to Dan after the 3 long months when he hadn't heard from her, when he hadn't even known where she was, the girl that he loved more than life itself. Oh God, if only he'd been able to wire her, to tell her to stay away, to stay far away from Cranport, from the fear-cursed town where terror now ran rampant. But he hadn't known how to reach her until the telegram had come, a half-hour ago, to say that she was on the Cannonball Express. And then it was too late, except to jump into the sedan and send it rocketing to the station so that he could catch her there, make her stay on the train and send her away. Old Pete Foley had goggled at him, swinging back the big gate so that he could go through the high barbed wire fence. One of the guards had come running, the floodlights glinting on his sawed-off shotgun, to shout incoherently at him. They'd been afraid for him, and he was afraid too. With hammering trepidation running like a cold flame through his veins, he feared that which was loose in the factory town. For a weird menace had made beleaguered fortresses of the Mayflower factory, and of the Hiawatha Motor Works on the other side of town. The wind of his own speed stung his red-rimmed eyeball sharply. He squinted through the windshield. Look! Even downtown here, even here in the heart of Cranport, where the terror had not yet struck, where men were not yet mysteriously, strangely missing from their homes, fear was a dark river inside shuttered, door-barred houses. It was early. It was only 8 o'clock, but the only moving figures to be seen were 2 patrolmen, coupled for protection, with their guns in their hands as they walked down the center of the roadway, away from shadowy alleys, from the lightless nooks that might be ambush for whatever it was that snatched men out of life into some unnameable fate. Stores were tight shut. The station plaza, as he'd rounded it, was a broad, deserted expanse, its asphalt somehow gleaming ghastly under the light filtering down from ornamental lampposts. King brought his car to a squealing, skidding halt. He flung out of it, thumped stiff-legged across the sidewalk, shoved a shoulder against the swinging door. He was inside the waiting room, was pounding between a long row of benches toward the exits of the tracks. His footfalls echoed hollowly under the high domed roof. The place was empty of life, and was filled with brooding, breathless dread. The blind was down over the ticket agent's window, and there was no gateman. Dan stopped short, his skin crawling. What was that on the floor, sticking out from under the bench? A shoe? A foot? He knelt down and got his hand on it. His other hand, supporting him on the floor, found something wet, warm, sticky. The body at whose foot he tugged came sliding out, spreading a pool of its own blood. Oh, God. The corpse had no head, only a shapeless mess of pulped flesh and smashed bone where it ought to have had a head. What was once a uniform was now just shredded grey rags, matted with clotted blood. The oncoming train whistled again, nearer this time, and outside the rails hummed. Through King's retching nausea an alarm blared, and he twisted, stood up, and started to run. But a tremendous form, black and grotesque, avalanched down upon him from over the top of the bench. Chapter 3. Terror at the Crossroads. Ducking to avoid the attack, Dan King's feet skidded out from under him on the blood-red tiles, and he went down flat, half-rolling. The pouncing, shaggy monster missed and thudded alongside him. King realized he was under the bench and kept on rolling. A big, hairy arm darted after him, and a huge paw, black-taloned, was snatching for him and caught the hem of his coat. He tore the cloth away, came out into the aisle on the other side. He got his knees under him, shoved with his hands, and leapt up. 2 huge apes had come out of hiding in the deserted waiting room of the station. A gigantic beast loomed in front of him. His big, thewed arms went around him, hugging him against stiff bristles that rasped his face. Grated his lips as his mouth came open for a yell that the hairy hide stifled. The beast's circling hold constricted him, making breath wheeze from King's lungs under the irresistible pressure. Excruciating pain seared his back, his chest, as the steel trap squeeze crushed his ribs. His fists beat a futile tattoo on the brute's sides. A yellow-toothed grin between thick black lips blurred in his burning, bleared vision. Dan's knee jerked spasmodically up, found softness and drove into it. The ape squealed in agony and his grip relaxed, slightly, but just enough for King, the desperation exploding into momentarily redoubled strength, to enable him to jerk free and stagger backward. The further bench caught him, held him upright, and he sucked sobbing breath into collapsed lungs, and had a fleeting glimpse of the primate doubling up, and kicked savagely at his agonized groin. A shadow fell across him. He wheeled around to see the other ape towering over him, its splayed feet groping for a prehensile grip on the top of the bench separating them, its huge legs haunching to pounce. Terror pronged King's breast. The jungle denizen launched a ferocious swoop, and Dan's heels drove into the tiles, catapulting him forward and under the down-circling arc of the hairy monster's leap. His outflung hands clutched at the bench top the beast had just left, giving him a hold sufficient to vault the high-backed furniture. He pounded down, just missing the sprawled corpse of the murdered gateman he'd discovered. He hurdled the gory cadaver and pelted toward the track exits. Padding footfalls behind told him the brutes were on his trail. He could almost feel their hot breaths on his neck. The eerie, macabre silence that had shrouded the incredible struggle was shattered by a sudden high, wild shriek from outside. It crescendoed to a wailing, ear-piercing scream. Then there was the pound and hiss of a locomotive driving past, the screech of jamming brakes. From somewhere a thin whistle shrilled. King lurched between out-jutting brass rails, crashed against a door that didn't swing open, that was appallingly immovable, locked. His last hope of escape collapsed like a bursting balloon. He was penned in, utterly lost. Panic and despair twisted at the pit of his stomach, and he whirled to face the oncoming bestial doom. He gasped, stung by the discovery that the savage primates were no longer intent upon him, but were surging out through the street entrance. He reeled, snatching at the short, curved rail lengths that had made a standing place for the guard who would never stand again. Half-stunned, he fought for breath, fought to still the pound of an overtaxed heart hammering against the walls of his aching chest. Through vertiginous darkness swirling inside his skull, dim realization came that the fearful messengers of an awful death had been scared off by the sound of the arriving train. The train! Nader! He pushed himself away from the rails to which he clung, threw himself around the barrier, thrust at the next door. That too was locked, mocking his efforts. Oh God, he had to get out there, had to warn her. "All aboard," a far-off voice intoned. "All aboard." King was running wildly along the line of rail-guarded doors, was frantically trying each one. The very last swung open. Yellow light squares were already sliding over the platform as the express crashed away. He shoved his way through, saw Nader peering about her, far down, a bag alongside her. "Nader!" Dan shouted, sprinting toward her. "Nader!" She came to meet him and was in his arms within a second. His lips that had thirsted so long were crushed against hers in a long embrace. She was warm, dear in his arms. "Darling," he murmured, "it's so good to have you back." Then, momentarily forgotten terror was back, cold at the base of his brain, and he pulled away. Chaotic words rose to his throat. He swallowed them as he remembered that the train was gone now, that there was not to be another till morning. His plan to send her away was blotted out. He must think, must find a way to safeguard her. Meantime, no use in frightening her. "Oh, Dan, I've longed for you so. If Dad hadn't been with me, I would have found a way to write to you. But he put me on my honor before he went away." "Away? Wasn't he with you in—" Dan stopped short, sparred for time, and tried to think. "Florida? No. He took me to Miami and left the next day. Said he wanted a long fishing trip all his life, and that I wouldn't enjoy it." But King scarcely heard. They were alone on the platform now, and those apes might be back. The apes, good Lord. What did the attack in the station mean? Were they the prowling menace terrorizing Cramport? Had they marked him for their next victim? "Come on," he blurted, picking up the girl's bags and taking her arm with his free hand. "Come on, let's get going. We need to get away from here." He started off, his glance furtive, fearfully searching the shadows. He was fairly dragging her, half running. "But Dan," Nader protested, "why are you going around outside? It shot her through the waiting room." "Yeah, but there's someone I want to avoid is waiting for me. We'll go this way." The gateman's body was still in there, and she must not see it. "Look, here we are. How do you like the new car? Isn't it a beauty?" Well, he must let the police know about the dead man, but not now, not till he had Nader indoors, safe. "Oh, it is. I must drive it." She pulled away from him, had the door open, and had slid under the wheel. A flicker of movement, seen out of the corner of his eye. This twisted King around. Shadows at the end of the station seemed to be taking on rounded form, seemed to be coming alive. He twisted back, flung Nader's bag into the sedan, and jumped in. "Get it started," he yelled. "Quick!" The starter whirred as she clicked over the ignition key, and the girl's small foot went down on the button. The motor roared, gears clashed, and the car jumped forward like an unleashed greyhound. Wind beat in under the lifted windshield. Darkened houses flicked past. "What was it?" Nader flung this question at him, her eyes steady on the road. "You sounded so scared." A A pulse thumped in his temples. Dull pain throbbed in his chest. Every breath was stabbing torture. He was corseted with agony. The battering he'd sustained, the terrible squeezing, anesthetized at first by excitement, by the thrill of his sweetheart's return, were now showing their effect. He couldn't think straight. But he must not scare her. Let the sharp-clawed fear tear at her that was slicing his own brain. He had to get her to safety, behind barbed wire, under the protection of armed guards. Accident at the plant, he answered. So hard to talk, each word searing his lungs with new pain. Gotta get back there, quick. Hurry. Once there, once safe, he could finally tell her. An accident? You're hurt, Nan. Your face. No, not hurt. Working hard day and night. Just drive fast. I'll tell you when we get there. Don't talk now, just hurry. Working hard? Oh, God, as the car hurtled through the night, the torturesome weeks of which this was the culmination reeled through Dan King's throbbing mind, a motion picture film edged with corroding acid. The days of feverish preparation for the new model, the start of production and the great ads flowering in the newspapers all over the nation. And then came crashing catastrophe. On that very same day, other ads had appeared, proclaiming in staring black type cuts in Hiawatha's prices that made Mayflower's drastically lower ones seem extortionate. Devastating cuts. An investigation had driven into King's being the certitude that Warren Fenton must have had a spy in his designing room, for the patent application had scarcely had time to reach Washington when a high board fence had gone up around the Hiawatha area, and the workers there had not been permitted to leave it. Hiawatha must have made changes too. But what changes? King had purchased his competitor's product, had torn it down and analyzed every bit of its fabric. There was no cheapening in material, in design. The only saving could be in labor. He'd met Fenton's cut with another, only to find his rival going under his price again. King was selling at cost now, but Hiawatha's cars sold far below, unbelievably cheaper. Even if the unions would have stood for it, there was absolutely no room for any wages for the workers. How were they doing it? Mayflower was equal to the new reduction, but it was suicidal. Bankruptcy stared at Dan King, swept down upon him. He'd been a very vortex of energy. He'd been everywhere in the plant, cutting down every least waste, speeding up, exhorting, driving his men till they were strained to the very last pitch of exhaustion. Years of cooperation, of good treatment, had their reward, and the beleaguered manufacturer had begun to see light. And then, the terror had begun. One by one his workers had vanished, gone into some eerie limbo of oblivion. At first he'd thought Fenton was raiding him, but, even admitting disloyalty, if Hiawatha had won away the missing laborers with higher pay, where was his rival's saving? Even United Motors' great treasury could not stand such a drain. Desperately, King had fought on. He'd put up a barbed wire barricade of his own, floodlighted and patrolled by armed guards. He'd set up cots for his men, had forbidden them to leave the place. The assembly line was moving again, was speeding up. All day long autos were spewed out of the two great plants, roared away in long motorcades to a public that was making Saturnalia of the weird battle. While the night shift labored, gates were closed, barred, and sentineled. The conflict was at a stalemate. Battling alone, Dan King had been a staggering atlas, carrying the Enterprise on his stalwart shoulders. With the period of Roger Stone's self-exile ended, with him returning, the scales might yet turn. Good Lord. A grisly speculation trailed across his mind now. Was that the reason for the attack upon him? Was there some macabre connection between... He jerked upright. The road ahead curved, dipped to a fork whose bright branch went toward the Mayflower Works, whose left was the shore road passing Nada's home, going on to the Hiawatha plant. Just as his car's headlights scythed through blackness to impinge on the intersection, they caught a black, huge form that had leaped back into the shrubbery with the ungainly yet swift gait of the apes he'd just been battling. An ambush. "Hey, stop," he yelled, snatching for the emergency brake. "Turn back." The motor sound cut off. The sedan lurched, skidded, and slewed half around. Its front wheels went into a ditch. There was a rending, tearing sound, the crack of fractured metal. His auto seat dropped sickeningly beneath King, and Nader lurched against him. "Oh, the axle smashed," he grunted, icy with realization that escape in the sedan was now impossible. Darkness blotted the road now, but senses sharpened by fear brought intimations to him of a black mass moving along it toward them. The skewed headlamp beam showed a wilted, straggly garden and an unpainted low shack. As frail as it looked, it was the only shelter, better at least than the smashed car. He tugged at the door handle of the car and felt a moment of sinking despair as it resisted his efforts. He pounded his shoulder against it, and finally it gave. Sprawling out, King surged to his feet. Nader was staring at him from the car, white-faced, and now the pad of oncoming footfalls thudded menacingly against his ears. He mouthed some unintelligible exclamation, dragged the girl out, and was pounding now towards the lightless house. "Dan!" the girl gasped in amazement as he pulled her roughly along. "Have you gone mad?" King pulled in a sobbing breath as his feet pounded on a creaking porch. A door faced him in the drab wall, and he snatched at its knob, praying that it was not locked. It went inward to his thrust. He pulled Nader inside, slammed the door shut, and leaned against it. "No," he lipped. "I'm not crazy, but the world is." Nader was a pallid spectre in the darkness. "I tried to keep it from you, but horrible things are loose in Cramport." His searching fingers, fumbling for a key or a bolt, felt the splintered metal of a smashed lock. Furniture bulked vaguely in the gloom. He lurched for the largest, got hands on a heavy table, and tried to drag it toward the door. "Here, help me." Nader sprang to his assistance. The table moved, smashed against the portal just as unshod feet thumped on the porch beyond, and a body thudded against the door. The whole structure shook at the impact. The girl screamed once and clung to King, and then a snuffling, animal sound came from outside, and at the same time, in the very room with them, they heard the slither of stealthy movement. The rustle of fabric scraping against the floor. Something was creeping craftily toward them. Chapter 4. Sean O'Flaherty's Doom. The menace outside, the menace within, clutched King's throat with choking fear. Of the two, the mysterious, crawling thread inside was the more imminent, the more appalling. The ape would be held back for a moment, at least by the hasty barrier. Nader came up against him. He could feel her trembling, could hear her choked whimper. He got a hand into the pocket of his jacket, found wood matches, got one out and scraped a thumbnail across its head. The murk fled when the match flared. A shabby drab room sprang into flickering existence, a doorway on a scabrous wall. A hand, grey, skeleton-like, grasped its sash low down. A fleshless, cadaverous expression hitched into view, almost level with the floor. Mad eyes glared at King from sunken, dark sockets, and the barrel of a shotgun shoved out, lifted with snouting menace. King leapt, catapulting across the chamber. He had his fingers on the gun barrel. It came away easily, too easily. Nader shrieked, and the scrape of the barricading table cut across her scream. "I can't hold it," she screamed. "He's coming in." King whirled. The dark wall was slitted by white light from his wrecked car's headlights. The slit widened, was jogged by the table, by Nader's shoulder, and was blotched by a silhouette beyond the door, like the tall black outline of a shaggy ape flank. The gun butt jarred against his shoulder. "Get away," he yelled. "Get away, Nada." The girl's white form swept aside, out of the line of fire. Gun roar blasted, thunderous in the confined space. There was suddenly a jagged-edged, gaping hole in the door. A howl of rage and pain shrieked through the night. King fired the other barrel, and the roar of his shot was deafening. When the ringing in his ears had faded, he heard a thin whistle and receding, thumping sounds that quickly faded out to silence. He got to the door, scrambled over the table, and peered out through the gap he'd made. Vague, lurching shapes were just vanishing into the night. He wheeled around. "They're gone," he gasped, shaking. "They're gone, Nada." "Light. Make a light, Dan." The girl's tone was stifled, taut, and a moan sounded, but not from her. King got out another match, snapped it into flame. Nada looked fearfully toward the doorway at the form that lay there. Dan King found an oil lamp and got it lit. The figure at which Nada stared, wide-eyed, was a flaccid, deflated old man. Sparse, white wisps of hair barely covered his scalp. His skull was visible through the tight, almost transparent skin on his aged, yellow visage, and wrinkled lids drooped over bulging eyeballs. King went and looked down at the scrawny, half-clothed form. His thin back lifted and fell with shallow, labored breathing, but King's spine prickled as he saw the ancient's trailing legs, saw that they were horribly twisted, broken as a wanton child would break a despised doll. Recognition palpitated in the aching throb of Dan's brain. This was Sean O'Flaherty, pensioned off by Roger Stone 2 years ago. This afternoon his son Francis had begged for leave to visit the ailing father, and had not returned by nightfall. Now King knew he would never return. This was not the first visit the apes had made here tonight. There was a sudden rattle in the old man's throat. The frail, tortured body arced, blood gushed from between his thin lips, and then Sean O'Flaherty fell back and was still. "Damn, a fighter to the last," King muttered. Evidently the old man had been aroused from a numbed coma by the noise of his and Nada's entrance, had thought them the simian marauders returning, and had dragged himself along the floor on a mission of vengeance. "Dan, oh Dan," Nada quavered, shuddering. "What's going on here? What awful thing is going on?" King got his arm around her and held her close. "I thought I could keep it from you, but, well, listen." And rapidly and concisely, he told her of those past terrible weeks. "That's why I was in such a rush to get to the plant. I knew you'd be safe there. But now, with the car wrecked, I don't know what we're going to do." "They're afraid of the gun, Dan. They ran away when you fired." But he shook his head. "Well, I got a hunch they'll be back, Nada. There's something peculiar about those apes, about the whole thing. I mean, the grim, purposeful way they fight, the peculiar whistle that controls them. I have a strange feeling that a human is behind their activities, some human fiend." He broke off then. The thrum of an approaching car came clearly in, rose to a roar, and then cut off. King wheeled to the door as footsteps thudded, and he lifted his shotgun. "Hello there?" someone called. "Hello inside. Anything wrong?" "Hey, who's there?" King challenged. "Who is it?" "Hey, that you, King? Thought I recognized your car. This is Fenton, Warren Fenton of Hiawatha." "Wait." King reached the door, pulled aside the table. Fenton came in, slim, dapper, his sharp face anxious. "What?" he began. "Oh, hello, Miss Stone. I didn't know you were—" Then his expression changed as he saw King's weapon, as his eyes darted to the corpse on the floor. "Oh, great Jupiter! What's happened?" "Plenty," King snapped. "The damn beasts that have been raising hell around the county got one of my best men here. Killed the poor man. Almost got us. Apes, Fenton. great apes running wild. I'll be damned. Apes! The astonishment was vivid in the man's face. Was it acting, or... King quenched the half-formed thought. Nonsense. He couldn't have anything to do with them. Hey, have you notified the police? Fenton asked. Oh, the police. I've been trying to get Miss Stone to a place of safety. Hey, take us to Mayflower, will you, Fenton? I think we can get through now. Can't, I'm sorry. Gotta get back to the plant right away on the hop. But I passed the Stone place, so I'll drop you off. You can phone the cops from there, and I'll chase some of my guards over to help you till they come. Hey, look, take us to your plant. I'm afraid. King checked at Fenton's narrow eyes, at the suspicion flaring in them. Okay, all right, he said wearily. I understand. You're afraid I'll see your secrets. The inside of the big house was musty-smelling, fetid with the dust of disuse. Dan King locked the tall entrance door as Nader switched on a light. He turned. Hey, where's the phone? Nader's hand came up to her throat. Dan, I forgot. It's no good. We had it disconnected when we left. A pulse throbbed in King's temple, but he still managed to grin. Never mind. Fenton's guards will be here soon. You go and wash those smudges off your sweet face. I'll stay on watch down here with this gun, but I don't think there's any real danger anymore. We're too close to Hiawatha for them to attack us. We knew there was neither rhyme nor reason in the words, but he had to say something to quiet the girl's apprehension, to dim the little fires of terrible fear in her eyes. What? Well, I'd rather stay down here with you, Dan. I'm afraid. I'm deathly afraid. The man made his tone firm, though. Oh, do as I say. What kind of wife are you going to make if you're going to argue every time I tell you to do something? Well, Nader smiled wanly. Wife? How could that sound? All right, dear, I'll obey. Then she turned from him and climbed tiredly upward. King's tortured gaze followed her till she was out of sight on the landing above. Her small feet pattered along the stairs hall. From outside, leaves rustled, somehow ominously. Was it the wind soughing through the foliage, or... Apprehension swelled within him, tightened a squeezing hand to his heart. Then sudden anger brought a pulsing, red mist before his eyes. He wouldn't cringe here, waiting for an attack. No, he would go out and drive them away. He shot back the door bolt and was outside. Night shrouded the landscape grounds, lay like a silent death shroud over the lawn. The thick bole of an ancient locust blocked his vision, and he strode a pace or two forward to get beyond the obstruction. Then a huge shadow dropped out of its foliage and hurtled down on him. The back of his head crashed against the tree trunk, and the world exploded into whirling, coruscating nothingness. Chapter 5. Flight Through the Trees. Pain was a dark sea on which Dan King floated, slowly lifting, slowly sinking to the long roll of its slow tide. Now it changed to a meshed network clothing his body, constricting, relaxing, tightening again with a leisurely, demonic pulse. Pain throbbed in his every cell, his every sinew. It bathed him, seeped through him, a dull, queasy agony as though molten, hot quicksilver had replaced his life fluids. Light beat against his closed lids, searing his eyeballs, pressing against them like gouging thumbs. King moaned in agony. Dim thoughts crawled within him and summoned up a nightmare memory of whispering voices, vague forms moving in a blaze of white light, piercing black eyes set in a swarthy face, the lower half of which was grotesquely obliterated by white blankness. There had been a horrific black expression, too, somewhere in the seething, vertiginous phantasmagoria, a dark, browless visage that had been primitive evil incarnate. Steel had flashed, sharp steel descending toward him. There was a stiffened silence about his torment, and the feeling of walls closing him in, and a sense of utter helplessness. Where was he? What had happened to him? What had happened to Nader, whom his carelessness had betrayed? Had those apes... Oh, Nader... The name was a tortured shriek in his blurred consciousness. He was on his feet now, staring about him wild-eyed, reeling with vertigo engendered by pain. He was in a small, white-walled room. The bed on which he'd been lying was its only furnishing. There was an open window high up over the bed, but it was steel-barred. King staggered to the door of the cell-like room. It was locked. He backed away, hunching a shoulder, crouching for a battering rush at it. Sounds came from beyond the door, the padding movements of some ponderous body. Something brushed against the panel like bristles of a hairbrush scraping across it. Hair lifted at the back of King's neck and his lips snarled back from his teeth. A key clicked over and a throaty voice rumbled outside. Fear exploded in Dan King's soul, fear of that which was outside, of that which was coming in. He whirled, leapt up onto the bed, reached high, grasping the bars, and pulled himself up to the sill, crouched in the window embrasure. Behind him hinges squealed, and an animal fetor, a bestial miasma, tainted the air. He dared not look back down. His hands folded around the bars, wrenched. Incredibly, the steel rods were bending. They were twisting. Strength then surged up in him, and he felt his muscles bulging across his back, felt his upper arm swell, his neck cording. Stone then split with a sharp report, and the bars were loose in his hands. He lurched out through the opening, toes gripping the framework. His legs straightened, catapulting him out of the sill, hurling him in a long arc out through and into darkness. The foliage was a rustling, black silhouette against a black sky, and his arms flung out ahead of him, fingers curling. Leaves whipped across his face, twigs lashed at him, and his clutching hands closed on rough bark of a limb that bent, dipped under the sudden weight of his body, but held. He was catapulted, thrashing through the treetops. He let go of the branch he held, and was falling still, and then caught a still thicker branch where it forked out of the trunk. His heels dug, rasping into the bowl. His knees clutched it. He was immobile, frozen against this friendly tree. He then looked back, peering squint-eyed. Leaves, branches were blackly laced across a white square that stared at him out of a dark wall. Great God, it was yards away from the nearest bough that could have supported him. He couldn't have jumped that distance. No man could have, impelled by whatever panic, by whatever terror. But somehow he'd done it. Amazingly, he'd done it, and he was free. Well, for the moment at least. From somewhere below, shouts came. An array of light suddenly appeared. Shadows cut it, the shadows of running men, of beings formed like man. King chuckled then, and was again on the move. Some instinct told him how to do it, how to use his newfound strength, his new dexterity in swinging through these treetops, in walking sure-footed along bending limbs. He made no more noise through the leaves than the light breeze did. The sounds of the hunt travelled off, the hunters at fault. Well, he would have liked to have seen them, to have known who it was that had taken him captive. The mystery of the terror he knew lay there for him to fathom. But a greater need drove him, a greater emergency. He had to get away from here. He had to get to the big house on the shore road and find out if Nader was safe. Dan King's nostrils flared. He'd never before noticed how the damp night emphasized these odors. He could distinguish the fresh green aroma of growing plants, other smells, staler, that reminded him of a zoo. From his right came a mixed odor of road, tar, gasoline, oil, a smell that could be made by nothing else but a highway. That was where he must go then, to the right. The clump of trees, which was an easy path to his uncanny skill, suddenly petered out, but the last branch arched over a high wall, and from beyond that the road smell came very strong. Dan King worked out along the bough, hand over hand, until it dipped beyond the barrier. The highway was fully 15 feet below, but, not even stopping to think, King let go of his hold. He swooped downward and landed on all fours. bent arms and legs took the shock like springs. He was scarcely even shaken. He rose, threw an apprehensive glance about him, and saw the sky was overcast and that it was very dark, but somehow his sight, like his sense of smell, had grown keener, more acute. He made out the high lift of the wall over which he'd come, its crenellated top running off into the distance. There was only one wall like that near Cranport, the one bounding the old Fosdick estate, where the Solban shows wintered. Ah, the Solban shows. Speculation stirred within him, and yet still eluded him. Yeah, the physical prowess, the sense of well-being that filled him despite the still throbbing ache to which he'd awakened, seemed to be matched by a corresponding mental sluggishness. What was this urgency beating at him, the dread that blanketed him? Ah, yes, Nada. He must get to Nada's home, must find out whether she was there or not, whether they'd taken her too. They. Oh, that thought made him afraid again, dreadfully afraid. He was loping down the dark road now. He stooped over, his arms hanging loosely in front of him, his hands curled. He could run faster that way. He came out into a broader boulevard. An orange light hung over the intersection from a wire running across between two tall poles. This was Shore Road, and the big house stood a mile to the left. King started to turn in that direction, and suddenly a light blazed all about him. He whirled, saw an interurban trolley driving down upon him. Well, it meant help. Help to get quickly to Nada. Human aid to battle the menace of the apes so mysteriously ravaging the countryside. He lifted his arm in signal. The brakes grated, and the trolley was slowing. It loomed over him, the motorist peering out. But then, the man's face went suddenly livid, and incredulous terror flared into his eyes. And the car once again picked up speed, thundered past, and careened down the road. King stared after it, stunned. The fear of death had been in that florid expression. What was there about himself to... Well, he shrugged away this dazed speculation. He had no time for pondering, no time to fathom the motorist's startling behavior. He needed to get to the big house, to find Nada. He was loping now, bent-legged, shambling-footed along concrete hot with the August sun that burned his feet. He swerved to grass plots at the sidewalk's edge, found the footing firmer, easier here. He sprinted past widely separated dwellings that were lightless, blind to the night. Nobody lived out here any longer. They'd long since moved into the center of town, to huddle for mutual protection against the frightful creatures that came by night to carry people off from their very beds. He'd been a fool, a witless dunce to have let Fenton persuade him to take Nada to the big house. Oh God, was she there? Or was she in that grim structure back there in the woods, suffering Satan alone knew what tortures? He stopped stark still, paralyzed by sudden indecision. Should he go on? Perhaps he should go back for help. A siren wailed in the distance, the siren of a police car. It screamed nearer, coming in fast. Oh, thank God, he would stop them, tell them all he knew. Here, finally, was help. The car rushed nearer, its headlights two green spots in the darkness. King jumped out into the road, waving his arms above his head, shouting. The siren cut off. An orange spark flashed among the dark bulks of the hurtling car's occupants. Then another. Dust spat from the concrete in front of him. A car track clanged, and tardily the double crack of rifle shots reached Dan King. They were shooting. At him! At him! Gun flare spat again, and something zoomed past King's ear, like a buzzing, virulent bee. He spun around then, a black mass of trees looming at the roadside. He leapt for them, was in among them, and was scrambling up a shag-bark trunk. The police car had squealed to a stop now. Through the leaves he saw men spraying out of it, rifles like sticks in their hands. They were hunting for him. "Hey, we've got the damn devil," someone shouted. He's in there somewhere. Anyone sees him, shoot to kill." The underbrush threshed as heavy, sweating men plowed through it. The sharp odor of their bodies stung King's nostrils. He could tell where each one was by the hiss of his breathing, by his aroma. He slipped silently through the arborage, working west toward the big house. He was quivering within. He was now a hunted beast, an outcast. By some strange trick of fate, every man's hand was against him, to capture him, to slay him. Chapter 6. Man into Beast. The trees along the route he took were evenly spaced in long rows that spread away from him on either side. The tang of rotted, fermenting apples was acrid to his nose. This was an old orchard, abandoned, run wild. A recollection stirred within him. There was just such an orchard alongside the stone mansion. Was this it? Was he so near? Was he so very near? So near and yet so damnably far, with those armed men below him, eager to blast him with their bullets, to make carrion of him. The foliage started to thin. He was the end of the grove now. He lay along a bough of the last tree and squinted out. A pulse thumped in his temple. There it was, the place that was called the Big House, majestic against the lowering heavens. The roof over the kitchen addition jutted out at him from the high blackness of a windowless wall. It ended just below him, 30 feet away. Man smell was pungent now in King's nostrils. His hackles rose, and he peered down into the murk of the cleared space between. A still, shadowy figure was down there, tense. Light from somewhere glinted on metal, the barrel of a rifle. Dan's neck swelled. Small muscles in his face knotted, tightening his upper lip in a soundless snarl. Saliva drooled from the corners of his mouth. This was one of the men who had shot at him, who was hunting him down. He was waiting there, waiting to kill Dan King, to keep him from his mate. Hate was a dark flood in his brain, hardening into sly craftiness. King gathered his legs and arms under him slowly, carefully, so as to make no warning sound. He was crouching now on the bough, his sinews quivering with leashed eagerness. Now! He dropped down, fierce hands outstretched, down onto his enemy. A white face flashed up at him, and he pounded down on the man. His fingers flashed to a soft throat and dug in. The body under him arched. Hands tore at his strong arms that were like columns of steel. Eyes stared into his own out of a purpling face, eyes black with agony and incredulous terror. King's blood ran riot with triumph. In savage longing he wanted to tear, to rend this weakling he'd so easily conquered. Wild laughter rattled in his chest, his knees crunched into a soft belly, and he gouged viciously. The eyes into which he glared had glazed over. The man was struggling no longer, was merely limp. Suddenly, Dan King retched. Realization swept across him with a sick nausea, and his throttling claws opened. Good Lord, what was it that he was doing? What in God's name was this ferocity that boiled turbulently within him, this clamor to kill, to destroy, to sink his teeth into warm flesh? He rolled away, rose, stood trembling, shivering with a grisly dread. The whistle shrilled. Others answered, one by one, from every point of the compass. A long quiver ran through the flaccid creature on the ground, and pulled-in breath screeched. "Hey, who's missing?" distant voice said. "Someone didn't answer." Then, "Jack!" Alarm was a knife edge in this bald call. "Jack Parker, where are you?" "Other side of the orchard." Another voice. "Hell, maybe the blasted thing got him." Running sounds came nearer, fear-shocked curses. "Jack! Jack!" Panic blazed inside Dan now. He whirled away, leapt the steps of the kitchen, twisted its doorknob. The portal resisted him. so he crashed a huge fist at the dull gleam of the key plate. The metal easily snapped, and the door flew open. He was inside, had shut the door behind him, and was crouched against it. Muffled voices came through. "Here he is! Geez, he's only half alive. Oh, we'll never get there. Not now. He's out in the fields." "The house?" "Nah, it's locked up. Stones have been away for months. Hey, come on, guys, we've got to get Jack to a hospital quick." Voices hushed by dread, by a queasy terror of something their owners didn't understand. Sounds of thudding feet going away, and of a whimpering moan. Sounds of a car driving off, a police siren screaming its melancholy, fearful wail, and then quiet. Silence, and the musty smell of old meals in Dan King's nostrils, of cold stove metal. Darkness, and the feeling of being enclosed, the stifling sensation of being shut in, the sensing of eerie shapes bulking about him, prickling his spine, bristling the hairs at the back of his neck with taut fear. He battled down frantic desires to get out of here, out into the open. The house was so silent, so dreadfully still. Nada. Oh God, they had taken Nada. She was gone. She was back there in the place from which he'd escaped, and filthy, lascivious paws were mishandling her palpitant body, leathery black paws dripping with the blood of their victims. He sprang up, unaware that his knuckles had been resting on the floor, and thumped across a cold stone place and out through a doorway. He was at the rear of the wide entrance foyer, and stairs lifted beside him, slanting up out of darkness into even more darkness. His throat worked, whimpering. Her name blasted out of his heaving chest. "Nada," he shouted despairingly, not daring to even hope for an answer. "Nada." Small thumps struck the ceiling over him. A pale shape appeared above him, wraith-like, a shape he could just about see through the stair rails. And then his heart leaped to a startled, fear-thinned cry. "Dan! Oh, Dan, dear!" "Nada, are you all right? Are you—" She was coming down. "Oh God, I've been so frightened, Dan. You were gone when I looked for you, and Mr. Fenton's man never came. I've been hiding up here in the dark, so terribly afraid. What happened? Why did you go away?" A switch clicked, and light sprang into being. The jetty cascade of her hair framed her dear face, her curving red lips. Luminance struck through the sheer silk of her nightgown, lining the luscious curves of her body. Hot desire swept Dan up like a surging wave and choked him. He wanted her, as we stepped out into the light. Nada's mouth jerked open, and a scream knifed out of it. Her eyes were wide, terrified. She spun around, dove for the great front door beyond, her shriek ripping the dusty air. The king sprang after her, but something leapt at him, out of a doorway to his left. He whirled to it, and met the glare of a horrific visage, a brutish, hairy expression. A pallid arm flailed out at him. He crouched, and then leapt to meet the thing's oncoming rush. But he crashed into glass. Glass shattered about him, and the shards ripped into him. The thing was gone. No, it had never been there. Dan King stared incredulous at the ruined remnants of a tall mirror. In jagged fragments of glass still jutting from the frame, he saw broken reflections of a white, unclothed torso, and of a bristle-blackened jaw. Realization exploded in his reeling brain. The thing he'd thought about to attack him had been his own reflection. It was him. He was no longer Dan King. He was now something half ape, half man. He was a grotesque, loathsome freak, a thing of soul-shattering horror, of terror unspeakable. No wonder the motorist had been all but paralyzed with fear at the sight of him. No wonder the police squad had come screaming out to shoot him down like some unspeakable foulness. No wonder Nader had just plunged out of... Oh, Nader. He spun to the open door through which she'd gone. And there she was, a white figure running across the lawn, running toward a high hedge that half screened the pale ribbon of the highway. And she screamed. Two huge black forms surged out of the greenery. Nader twisted, shrieking, but they had her. She was thrown over the shoulder of one of them, and then the couple vaulted the hedge. A horn hooted beyond, and a car motor roared into action. King catapulted out of the door, down the steps, and hurtled across the lawn, crashed through the brambles. He was out onto the road now, racing after the rushing sound of the auto. A red tail light winked at him, mockingly, and dwindled to a point, and then vanished. Oh God, oh merciless God, she was in their clutches now. His Nader was in the power of those who had made him into this unspeakable monstrosity. Scarlet rage shook Dan King. Horror unspeakable gibbered at him from rustling darkness. The terror beasts had swooped upon Nader. She was in the hands of the grisly, cruel monsters who were all the more terrible because of a mysterious, human intelligence that seemed to direct them, to control their urges with a cunning, uncannily not brutish. Nader was in their hands, and he himself was stamped with the mark of the beast, was an outcast against whom every man's hand was turned. He was a changeling, transformed by some evil metamorphosis, a leprous monster every man must flee from in terror, or fight to kill. Nader was in desperate danger, and he was powerless to help her, powerless to summon aid. He was alone, weaponless, naked. Naked. Clothed, hatted, he might not be so terrifying an apparition. Well, his awesome appearance masked, he might get close enough to someone to explain himself, to tell this unbelievable tale, to get help to Nader before it was everlastingly too late. Wait. The glimmerings of a plan began to form in his aching, tortured brain. His own plant was miles away, far to the other side of Cranport. But Fenton's was nearby, just over the ridge to which the road began to mount. Men with guns were there, with autos. So he wheeled, sprinted for the open door of the big house. Some of Stone's clothes would surely be there. Well, the need for haste screamed at him. A terrible urgency hammered in his racked soul. Hurry, before those fiends had time to get to work on Nader. Hurry, before the man with the half face and the piercing eyes could consummate that awful change in her. Hurry, please, God, let him be in time. King lurched wearily along the 10-foot fence surrounding the Hiawatha plant. He hadn't been able to button the trousers he'd found, and Stone's shoes didn't fit him. He was still barefoot then. But the borrowed topcoat, tied across his shoulders, hid his nakedness, and a broad-brimmed hat was pulled low down over his face. If only he could have shaved. A 500-watt lamp ahead spilled light in front of a high gate. King got to the circle of glare and pounded on the barrier. A small door in it opened. A man slouched out, short-barreled rifle lying across his palms, finger on the trigger. "What the hell?" he demanded, leering at King out of beady eyes in a pinched, pasty-complexioned face. "What do you want?" "Get Fenton. Get the other guards, rifles, and cars. I've located the terror hideout, and it's got Nader Stone," Dan King shouted. No, oh God, he couldn't make his tongue form another single human word. Now all that came out was a chattering roar, an animal cry, wordless unmeaning. His skin was a cold sheath for his body. Ice crystals formed in his veins, damming the blood rush. The change, the transformation was still going on, and he was more nearly an ape now, a beast. He had lost the facility for human speech. He could no longer tell this man, or tell anyone, what he wanted, what was happening to Nader, and how to find her. The man's gun jerked up and snouted at Dan's chest. "Come out of there," he growled. "Come out before I blow your guts through your backbone." Amazingly, there was no surprise in his tone, no fear, only this gruff command. King jerked his arms up over his head. His hand touched the brim of his hat in passing and knocked it off. The guard just grunted. "Hey, Harry, Jip," he bawled, not turning, keeping his weapon rock steady on King. "Come out here, look what I got. One of the monks dressed up, walking around as nice as you please and bawling at me." Two other low-browed, high-cheekboned roustabouts ran out into the light then. "Hell," one yawned. "You're drunk, Baldy, it's—" Then he saw King and stopped. "By God, so it is. Oh, someone's going to get the works for this funny business." Well, their talk, their simple acceptance of this unholy appearance, trailed an impossible speculation across the dizzy chaos of King's mind. But what mattered now was that he had to make them understand, had to get help to Nada. He licked his lips and tried again, but all he could manage was senseless chatter. Bring it inside." The one called Harry seemed of a slightly higher caliber, was not quite as uncouth, as gangster-like as the others. There was something vaguely familiar about his broad features, his narrow, hard eyes. "I'll march it over to the barracks. I'll phone up that you're coming." Then King remembered that face, pictured under flaring headlines. "Bollinger leads jailbreak. Public enemy #1 and a dozen lifers shoot way to freedom." Christmas," Yip mouthed. "There's going to be hell to pay over this. The boss is going to want to know how it got out and why. I vote for bumping it off and ditching it in the swamp. That way the boss won't know nothing about it." King shook his head, trying to clear it, and dread closed in about him once more. These men would kill him out of hand, and then Nada would be lost, irretrievably lost. "Hey, you was on the wall this evening, wasn't you, Gip?" Bollinger said softly, meaningfully. "Or was you in the guardhouse playing poker when you ought to have been on the wall, watching that none of them got out?" "Hell!" Gip swung around on him. "What's it to you where I was?" He reached under his left armpit, cursing. An automatic was suddenly in Bollinger's hand, and Baldy's gaze shifted. Upon this, King saw his chance. He leapt, lashing at Baldy's gun. Somehow it was in his hand, and it was a club he swung full force against the man's head. It landed and crunched sickeningly. There was no longer a face where it had struck, just a puffy, blood-covered place. It was past Baldy's falling body and had smashed a devastating fist against Bollinger's jaw, and then whirled to the other man. Well, that one gaped, his eyes goggling, his mouth open. King left the ground in one long leap. As he came down, his hand clamped on the wrist of a hand which was rising with a black automatic in it. He twisted, heard bone crack, and then the man screamed piteously. King's other hand, the club gun somehow jolted from it, found this fellow's throat. He felt gristle scrape under his powerful constriction, saw blood gush from the fellow's mouth. And wild triumph surged within him. Before he heard, the roar of a gun blasted from the ground behind him. A red-hot iron seared across King's scalp. Then darkness exploded inside his skull. He slid down into a sick blackness. Chapter 7. The Hell Surgeon's Lost. The crash of a stamping machine, the scream of a power lathe, these seeped into Dan King's sodden sleep. For weeks, for months, those sounds had pounded their infernal obligato into the catnaps he'd snatched wherever outraged nature had finally asserted itself. The crash of machinery, the strain under which he was working, the grisly, mysterious menace of the terror outside had given birth to weird nightmares, troubling even the sleep of utter exhaustion. This last one had been a beauty. King forced his leaden lids open. He was lying on the floor of the assembling room balcony, his face so he could look down on its floor. He blinked, dazedly. Weird. Was he still dreaming? Those weren't men posted along the moving conveyor. Not men tightening bolts, fitting in gears, bearings, building cars as they moved past. No. They were apes. Huge black apes. Brute-visaged, hairy, their grotesque hands flashing with uncanny skill. Wow, skill like the chimpanzee he killed at the Salburn shows that memorable night. Realization blasted through him. No, it wasn't a dream. Would to heaven that it were. Great Lord above, these weren't his own works. This was the Hiawatha plant. Those were great apes working down there, dexterously, with a deftness no human could surpass. They were apes. No wonder Fenton could undercut his price, cut it down to where there was no possible leeway for paying labor. He didn't pay labor. Fenton had been at the show that night, had seen the miracle Zortal's eerie genius had accomplished, the training of a brute to do everything a man could do. He'd made a deal with the trainer, had gotten him to train hundreds of these animals. To train, oh good Lord, where could they have gotten so many? Train them all in so short a time. Full understanding swept on King like a dark avalanche. No, they didn't train them. They made them. They took humans and by some satanic alchemy turned them into chimpanzees, set them to work with escaped convicts, killers as guards over them. As guards, not to keep out the terror that devastated Cramport, but to keep it in. Fenton, Zortal were the prime movers of the frightful scene, the demons behind it. It was they who had desolated Cramport's homes, shocked them like cracking nuts to extract the kernels that were food for their greed. And this demonic chemistry was at work in his own blood, was making an ape of him, was turning him into one of these brutish monstrosities. No, it was no dream. Oh God, it had been no dream. His long odyssey of terror, the weird alternation of man and beast within him. Now one, now the other ascendant. It had been no nightmare. He hadn't dreamed the hunt through the orchard, and Nada's capture. Oh, Nada. His Nada was now in their hands, and they were at work on her. They were making an ape of Nada. Dan leapt to his feet, or tried to leap. Cords cut into his arms and his legs. Cords gashed him, held him immovable. He was bound, helpless to save himself, and to save Nada. He groaned, rolled over. Feet thudded, and Bollinger's narrowed, murderous gaze looked down upon him. A livid bruise decorated the gangster's jaw. There was blood clotted on his lips. So you're awake, you, The epithet dripped foulness. I got a mind to smash your brains out like you did poor Baldy's. King stared up at him. Even this killer, this calloused spawn of the underworld, would help Nada if he knew what was being done to her. Oh, he must tell him about Nada. He chattered. Horror and despair twisted his vitals. Intelligible speech was gone from him forever. Speech and the last glimmering chance of aid for Nada. Wow, Bollinger gritted. I don't know why Zordal says you gotta go back so he can finish you up. Your face looks like a monk's now, even if you ain't got no hair on your chest. You sure talk like one. Here, see how you like this. He stooped, swiped vindictively at King's head with his open palm. There was the glint of metal in it, then the flat of an automatic crashed against King's temple. Pain split throughout his head. He arched up, throwing himself at his tormentor, but fell back as thongs cut into his arms and his legs. Bollinger rained blows upon him, snarling, eyes slitted and gleaming sadistically. King's head was ringing. Dizzy black clouds were swirling before his sight, through the agony of the terrible beating. Oh, he writhed, was dimly aware that the blows had stopped. He clung to shreds of consciousness desperately, and heard another voice above him. Oh, Harry, you fool, quit that. Zordal will tear your liver out for it. The hell with Zordal. Nobody cracks Harry Bollinger and gets away with it. Oh, if Zordal... Oh, shut up, you ass. Here he comes. King couldn't get his eyes open. Couldn't think. He lay in his welter of agony and heard approaching feet click. Heard an eager voice snap. Where is he? Where's the rat that escaped? All right here, Mr. Zordal. Here on the floor. Through his nausea, through the black clouds swirling about him, drawing him down into their oblivion, King was conscious of someone standing above him, of an inimical, hating gaze beating down upon him. Who did that? Who beat him up like that? Bollinger replied. I did. He sloughed me and I took it out on him. What do you say to that? And there was a sudden sharp sound of an open hand slapping flesh. This, Zordal snapped. This. A howl of rage and the sound of a scuffle followed. A soothing voice spoke. Hold it, Harry. You gotta take it and like it. They got us dead to rights, remember? If they turn us in, we burn. King lost his slender hold on awareness and went down into a miasmic darkness, into a stupor that was not quite wholly unconsciousness, so that vague imitations reached him of his being lifted and carried off, of the rattle and sway of a moving auto, of his being carried again. He was viciously thrown down then on some hard footing. The shock of the impact brought merciful oblivion. When consciousness drifted back, a fetid, animal odour assailed King's nostrils. He forced his heavy lids open to darkness that pressed in on his eyeballs. He lifted instinctively, dazedly unsurprised that he was no longer bound. Dread sucked at him, fear flared within him, and even in that moment of overpowering terror and awful despair, plucked at the very vitals of his being, as the thought of Nader seared across his pulsing brain. And then something growled in the sightlessness, and, black against black, he was aware of a plunging, gigantic bulk. Sudden light sprayed in, and Zordal stood framed in the doorway. The illumination showed Zordal, showed a huge ape leaping at King. Zordal's arm was uplifted, a lash hissed from its quick down flick and writhed around the beast's belly and flung it backward. King crouched, then leapt at Zordal. The whip caught him with a fiery sting, stopping his rush. He jerked away, struck again, cutting into him, and wrung a squeal of agony from his hoarse throat. He slammed to the ground, grovelled, his arms covering his head, his body quivering to the virulent, merciless torture of the lash. It stopped at last, leaving him a broken, bleeding thing. Well, that's your lesson, King, the man snarled. You'll behave now, till I come back for you. He laughed, gloatingly, humorlessly, and there was grisly threat in this weird cachinnation. He turned to the ape that had been attacking King, and his whiplash flicked out, driving the brute before him, driving the lumbering anthropoid out of the doorway. King saw a passageway beyond, and then the door slammed shut, cutting off the light. He lay prostrate, whimpering, beaten, heedless to the rustling sound of another simian coming toward him. Death would be welcome now. Death would release him from the torturing thought of his loved one helpless in the hands of this sadistic demon. But a rough tongue licked his wounds, warm spittle drooled along his aching flank. A shudder of revulsion shook him, and he rolled away. Above him a square of light, crossed by a close pattern of black bars, flared into existence. King rolled to it, struggled upright, reached hands up to its sill. He pulled himself up, looked through, and horror burst upon him. Soul-shaking horror. Nader Stone came awake to the terror of the dark room where she'd been imprisoned, to the terror of wall-muffled, bestial roaring. Her bare feet thudded as she leaped from the bed, her heart pounding, fear clutching her throat. She crouched, staring into the darkness. The ferocious sound suddenly ceased, after one wild, high shriek of an animal in utter torment. But the silence that followed seemed alive with furtive movement. The outlines of her cell became vaguely visible. The glimmer of walls, the darker outlines of a door. Nada bit her lip, forced her cold limbs into motion then. She reached for the door, found the knob. But it was no use. It was still locked as it had been when she first had discovered consciousness and had battled for release, only to sink at last into a stupor of exhaustion. A sob formed in her chest, welled out from between her writhing lips. What was happening out there? What had happened? Were the monsters whose prisoner she was battling for her, for possession of her? Had one conquered, was even now coming for her? Footfalls thumped beyond the door and came nearer. A scream contorted her vocal cords and then aborted in a soundless rasp. The knob twisted in her hand that still held it, and a key clicked. Nada's shoulder was against the panel, her legs were stiff, her feet gripped the floor. The door moved in, slowly, inexorably. A slit of light at its edge increased as the girl's bulging eyes watched it, widened. She couldn't stop it. A black hand showed, jogging the light, closed on the door edge. With the additional leverage, the barrier swung more rapidly inward. Nada's legs buckled. She slid to the floor, and lay there quivering. Shoes tramped in along the path of light. Shoes! Relief flared in Nada, and she rolled over, looked along trousered legs, along a white robe, seamless, to stocky shoulders of a white-gowned man looking down at her, his face swarthy and glowering. This man was Zortal, the animal trainer she'd seen at the carnival so long ago. Understanding flashed through Nada's dizzy brain, released from nightmare horror. In his absence, some of his apes had escaped and had carried her off. He had returned, punished them, and come to release her. "Oh," she gasped. "Oh, I'm so glad you're here. So glad." She stopped. Her scalp tightened. Why did he smile so grimly, so menacingly? Why did his black piercing eyes fix upon her unclothed form so hotly? You are glad." Slow words dropped down to her. "That makes me happy. I had not anticipated such a reception." Her lips were icy. What do you mean?" she managed to ask. "What do you mean?" His smouldering look was a lewd caress. He gestured. What could I mean? Gazing down at a body so beautiful, so divine. The actuality is even lovelier, more enticing than the promise I discerned when I first saw you. Do you remember that night at the circus when your lover killed my clever creature, the first reward of my researches, and incurred my undying hatred as a consequence? Oh, I have not forgotten. I hated him for that, and I hated him even more because you were his. I promised him a special fate, but I promised myself you. Nada twisted and was on her feet. "No," she choked. "No, you beast, you filthy beast. I'd die before I'd let you touch me." Zortal's lids narrowed. Through their slits, his eyes were somehow reptilian, and there was a hiss in his accents. "You disdain me." He shrugged, and his smile was an obese grin twisting across his face. "You refuse Zortal the Great. Well, Zortal shall not force you, but he shall have you. Willingly he shall have you. Come." Chapter 8. Death and Horror Combined. To Nada's agonized comprehension, it was clear only that he had retreated from his monstrous proposition, and that he was motioning her to the door. She went past him, out into a lighted corridor. "To the right," Zortal called. "The door to the right." The girl whirled, snatched at the door she saw before her. It opened. She plunged through and then stopped, aghast. This was not the way out. It was another room. A table flashed before her vision, its top a white slab at the sides of which angle irons rose, centered by open metal cuffs. Near the table a great ape squatted, its handcuffed wrists chained to the arms of the chair in which it sat. Over the huge hairy animal, steel bars were fitted vertically across a great square opening in the wall. She spun about. Zortal was in the doorway, coming in, grinning evilly and triumphantly. She sprang at him, clawing for his lascivious eyes. He seized her wrist with one rubber-gloved hand, held her off, ripped her nightgown from her with his other. Even in her terror, her outrage, a hot flush burned her cheeks as she knew that she was naked before him. He pulled her to him, his fiery breath gusting over her face. His burning lips slobbered on hers. She flailed at him with her free hand, with ripping nails. And he lifted her, insensible to her cries, her flailing nails, the kick of her naked foot. He threw her on the table, and magically her wrists were in the metal bracelets that he snapped closed. Springing to the foot of the table, Zortal grasped her flailing feet, forced them down, and cold metal clamped around her ankles, holding her helpless. Ada's screams rasped into voicelessness, into terror-numbed quiet. Zortal merely chuckled, threw a white sheet over her so that only her heaving chest and her head were left exposed. "I shall not share the sight of your beautiful curves with another," he said. "Just yet." The girl lay gasping, exhausted. Fear crawled through her veins, squeezed her pulsing brain. The hospital odor was acrid in the thick air about her, blending with the fetid stench of the ape. She turned her head to the brute, seeking its snouted black face rather than the evil, leering expression of the man. Movement above pulled her gaze to the cage front. Hands gripped the vertical bars, and a face came into sight. A hairy face. God, a monstrous creature, ape-faced, man-bodied, hung in the barred aperture, leering out at her, pounding at the steel. It was that appalling beast from which she'd fled when Dan's call had brought her downstairs. Dan? Oh, Mother of Mercy! Her soul was pronged with recollection of the man she loved, with fear for him. This caged thing must have struck him down, must have killed him even in the moment he'd called to her. Its mouth worked, hideously, and stark madness glared at her out of its eyes, in which there was a shuddersome, almost human semblance. Its long white arm reached out to her. "Antonio," Zortal called from the doorway. "Antonio, I am ready." The surgeon's mask of white gauze was over the lower part of his swarthy face, making him look gargoyle-esque, somehow even weirder. Another man came into the room. This one was also gowned in a half-sleeved robe of white, was also masked with a white gauze. A white turban covered his skull, came low down on his brow so that all that could be seen of his face was agate, hard, merciless eyes and a thin nose. "Who are you?" Zortal spoke sharply. "You are not my assistant." "No," the second man answered hoarsely. "I'm Crandall, one of the guards. Antonio got sick, and he knew I once studied medicine, so he phoned up to the plant for me to come help you. He said for me to tell you I wouldn't squeal, that you can trust me." Zortal appeared doubtful. Can you give anesthetic?" he inquired. "Ether or gas?" "Ether on a cone." Sure thing." We shall go to work then. The woman first." "Well, she don't look sick." Zortal laughed at this, gruesomely. "No, Crandall, she is not sick. You're about to see such an operation as none of your professors would believe possible. Only the great Zortal knows the secret of it, and it shall die with Zortal. But this much I can tell you, so that you may help me intelligently. I am about to excise a certain gland from this chimpanzee and transplant it in a new place, in the body of this woman." Zortal broke off then. There's the ether can, on the shelf behind you, also the coat. Crandall picked the things up, started dripping ether on the mask that was to go over Nada's face. From a sterilizer, Zortal lifted a scalpel and came toward her. His eyes were wide now, staring. "Go on," Crandall muttered. "What's this gland business for?" Zortal's chuckle was the evil chortle of a madman or a fiend. "You shall see. In half an hour her human attributes will fade. Her features will coarsen. She will chatter instead of speaking. She will—" "Ah, a monk. Do you mean that's how it—" "That is how I make the apes you have seen," explained Zortal, nodding toward the ape man shackled near the table. But Nada heard no more. "No," she screamed. "No, you can't do that to me. You can't." Her body arched, straining against the metal that gripped her wrists and her ankles. "Oh, kill me, but don't do that to me. Just don't." Zortal bent over her, the keen scalpel poised. "You had your chance. You refused me. Now you shall be unable to refuse. Before the change is completed, I shall possess you, and then I shall give you to the others. You shall have the honor of proving whether they can breathe." "Hey, let go!" Zortal whirled around to Crandall's sudden shout. The assistant's mask had been ripped away by the clutch of the ape-man's hand that had suddenly reached through the bars. The creature's other long arm was clawing out for him, and he was snarling, growling in bestial fury. Crandall jumped forward, out of reach. "Bollinger!" Zortal yelled. "You are Bollinger, not Crandall." There was suddenly a black automatic in the other man's fist. "Yep," he lipped. "Bollinger. Do you think you were going to get away with slapping me? Me?" The ape-man behind the caged aperture roared with rage, his bellows shaking the room, rattling the instruments within it. Native screams added to the pandemonium, while the howls of another simian that had come up beside the ape-man rent the air as it aided him in shaking the bars, in tugging them with a violence, a fury that seemed to be bending them. But through the tumult, Bollinger's shouted words impacted on Nada's ears. "Yeah, I conked Antonio. Then I got into his clothes, thinking maybe I could muscle in on your racket before I put you away. Well, that's no good, but this still is." Gun bark detonated suddenly through the riot, then again and again. Orange flame streaked at Zortal. On his white gown, a red splotch showed. Like a ripped meal sack, he crumpled to the floor. Well, the shock of it momentarily stilled the pandemonium. Nada's screams choked off. The caged animals, the shackled beasting in the room, went silent. Bollinger came slowly around to the girl and advanced slowly to her side. "Ah, now, my pretty," Bollinger lipped. "Let's look you over." With his unoccupied hand, he twitched away the sheet with which Zortal had covered her. He breathed, licking his lips. "Nice." Feet pounded outside, and then the door crashed open. "Zortal." Nada's father's voice sounded incredibly. "Have you heard anything of Nada?" He stopped abruptly, stood stark still in the doorway, his eyes now on the girl. "Oh, God, Nada!" "Stone," Bollinger gasped. "What the hell are you after?" The older man twisted to him. "Oh, Bollinger," he shouted, "you've got a hand in this. Oh, I'll turn you over to—" And then flat gun report stopped him. He swayed, and his face suddenly grayed. He grabbed at the table end for support. "Squeal on me, will you?" Bollinger gritted. "Ah, that'll shut your trap." "Murderer!" Nada shrieked. "You've killed him!" The ape in the chair lurched then. His heavy seat toppled against Bollinger, and the slayer stumbled backward against the wall cage. Clutching, reaching out between the bars, the man-ape had him now. Strong fingers were about his neck and were digging in. The man's eyes popped from their sockets, blood vomited from his mouth. And then he hung, a limp, bedraggled, lifeless thing, from the grip of the monster that had avenged Nada's father. "Daddy," the girl yelled, futilely straining to get to him. "Dad, are you hurt?" Roger Stone's tortured expression turned to her. "Oh, yeah," he gasped. His hand was clutched to his breast, and wet redness dripped through his fingers. "Yeah, he got me. Oh, can you forgive me, Nada, before I die?" "Forgive you? For what?" "Oh, for all this. I was the cause of it all. I couldn't see you married to a washwoman's son. I bought Hiawatha that day from United Motors. Well, King didn't know it." Color was draining out of his face, but somehow his voice had grown stronger. "Well, I planned to ruin Mayflower and King with Hiawatha's competition. Prevent your marriage that way. I motored back here from Florida by night, meaning to give Hiawatha the new car. It'd take 6 months to adapt their plan. Too long. Then Fenton told me about Zoltal's miraculous act at the carnival, and I got an idea. I sent for Zoltal, and he told me what he could do. Oh, I was desperate. Offered him Mayflower when it failed. Could be bought for a song. Well, he accepted." "What did he do, Father? What was it he did for you?" "I made apes of men so that he could have them work for nothing. They kept only memory enough to be able to go on with their usual work. It... Stone gurgled. Blood bubbled at his lips. He lurched, then dropped. "Nada!" Dan's voice, hoarse, rumbling, sounded in the murder chamber. "Nada!" The girl twisted. Her name was coming from the lips of the being that had been in the cage. That being. It was Dan. "Nada. Oh God, I can talk again. I can talk." With the help of the other beast thing, he'd pulled some of the bars out and escaped from the cage. She fought the manacles chaining her to the table, but surged fruitlessly against them. "Dan, what have they done to you?" "Not changed yet," came a new voice. A shirtless, staggering man clung to the door jamb, his hands clutching it, blood streaming down his white, pain-twisted face, from a wound in his scalp. "Not all changed. Started to, but not time for the transfusion. Treatment to complete the job. Zoltal hadn't made the transfusion yet. Gland alone is not enough. It's being absorbed. Man again soon." Antonio. Must be Zoltal's assistant. Pitched forward, thudded down atop her father's sprawled legs. "Oh, thank God," Nada gasped. Running feet pounded outside. A policeman barged in, a rifle coming up to his shoulder. "What's all this shooting it?" And he stopped and gaped unbelievingly at what the room held. Nada's mouth twitched. With a convulsive shudder, she fainted in the arms of Dan King, who could now talk again, and who was slowly becoming a man once more. So, pretty much the same outro that I do every time I tackle one of these big multi-hour stories. It does really take it out of me. It's just on the voice, really, more than anything else. And on the butt, because you're sitting on the office chair for quite a few hours to get this all done, and it starts to ache after a while. I have to go out and do some exercise tomorrow and not sit in this chair and do any recording. But of course I'll be back again soon. Operation Apple Tree will be continuing on Sunday, and I've got some really awesome things lined up for next week. Pretty quiet week on the regular job front next week, so yeah, should be some big hour-plus stories on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for you. Sound good? Okay, good. Well, that's enough for me for this evening. You have a lovely weekend, everybody. Till the next time, very, very sweet dreams. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like throwing me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.